Welcome to the first in a series of talks Wynn Resorts is hosting on the topic of diversity. This series is important to me because it is the first of several diversity initiatives we will undertake this year. Although we can and should feel good about where our company is today, there is always more we can do to foster diversity at Wynn. Today, I believe we have a team comprised of diverse voices, backgrounds, and opinions. I also think it's important that our employees in North America are able to see a leadership team that is representative of themselves. We've achieved that with our board of directors, which I'm proud to say is in the top 10% of Fortune 500 companies when it comes to diversity. But we have more work to do in our property and corporate executive leadership organizations. Work to do to be the best, as we are in so many other areas. For us, fulfilling that work is a multi-year journey, because as you all know, many of the leaders in our organization are those who rose through the ranks and through time and experience learned to lead our culture of excellence. So when we think about leadership diversity, we have to act now with a future state in mind, a state where folks join us now and evolve into the leaders of tomorrow. With this multi-year view in mind, this year we will launch a management recruitment program for recent graduates of historically Black colleges and universities, which you may have heard referred to as HBCUs, that have hospitality and business schools. In the first year of this program, we will endeavor to hire 3 to 5 employees who will go through a management training program and ultimately be placed in permanent positions in the company. I'm also excited to announce that we will have a corresponding program for internal candidates later this year as well. I look forward to seeing those programs come to life. As I mentioned at the outset, I'm very excited about the conversation you are about to see, and I appreciate your interest in the topic. With that, I will now turn it over to Glenda to introduce our speaker.
As we begin a new year, I am proud to present our first diversity program as part of our Diversity Speaker Series. This program commemorates the birthday of one of the greatest leaders of our time, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and leaders of the fraternity, such as Thurgood Marshall, helped shape and expand his leadership capacity, which ultimately helped him during the Civil Rights Movement. Dr. King personifies inclusive leadership, and I am happy to welcome another great leader, Dr. Everett Ward, 35th General President of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, to serve as our guest speaker. Dr. Ward is a respected transformational leader with more than 30 years of national, regional, and statewide leadership experience. Dr. Ward earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from St. Augustine's College. He also earned a Master of Arts degree from North Carolina State University and his PhD from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. I hope you enjoy this program, which highlights the 8 lessons of leadership from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Dr. Ward, thank you so much for joining me today and being a part of Wynn Resorts MLK commemoration. We appreciate you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here as we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King, and congratulate Wynn Resort for this outstanding opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So as the 35th General President of Alpha Phi Alpha, I felt that you would be the perfect person to come and talk to us about Dr. King's legacy of leadership. For those who aren't aware, Dr. King was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, yes. And a lot of his leadership qualities came from members that he was involved with the fraternity. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about that?
Well, thank you so much. Our fraternity was founded in 1906, 115 years of leadership and service. So when Dr. King joined the fraternity, he was very focused on being a part of an organization that had a legacy of fighting for justice and freedom. Mm-hmm. And so he continued to do that throughout his life. And our fraternity is very proud of his membership, but more importantly, the legacy that we continue on in his memory. So he was influenced greatly by such notable members as Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. His fellow comrade and colleague in the struggle, brother Ambassador Andrew Young, and countless others. So we are very proud of him. And we also took great opportunity to build a memorial in his honor, to lead that effort in Washington, D.C. And so our fraternity is very, very committed to his life and to his legacy.
That's awesome. And you mentioned two great leaders, Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall and Ambassador Andrew Young. So if those were people who were leading him and guiding him during this movement, you know, he had great barometers to choose from. Thank you for that. And so during your administration, you adopted the theme, the urgency of now. Yes. And that's something that Dr. King spoke about when he talked about 8 lessons of leadership. You know, why was it important for you to adopt that as your theme during your administration? And what did you hope to, you know, teach your leaders and members?
Well, we were building on his quotation, the fierce urgency of now, and what Dr. King was saying, that in this time, the urgency required no complacency, but it required positive action. And that built on the legacy of our fraternity, as well as our mission statement, and a component of our mission statement talks about advocacy for our communities. And I felt as General President, it was my responsibility to continue that legacy of the fraternity, but also Dr. King's legacy, because of the conditions that we were facing in the nation and around the world. When there's an assault on democracy, when we were looking at health disparities, when we were looking at access to education, these were all components that Dr. King was a vivid and strong leader fighting towards, his fortitude and dedication. And I felt compelled that as a brotherhood, we had to continue that legacy. And I'm so proud of the countless men of Alpha Phi Alpha who run for public office, who are being servant leaders in their communities. And that's the legacy that we continued and will continue in the future, with new general presidents to come as they continue that legacy, that 115-year legacy.
Aside from Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, he also spoke of the 8 lessons of leadership that he felt leaders should possess. We want to talk a little bit about those for a second. The first thing Dr. King mentioned was he felt that great leaders don't sugarcoat reality. You know, they call it like it is, and they're very transparent to their constituencies or their members. How is this transparency, and why is it important for business leaders today?
Well, I think if you look at Dr. King's legacy, he understood that the more transparent you were, the more you spoke truth to power, that it would crystallize the vision and the goal. And I think a corporate leader who is very articulate about the mission and the vision and the goals, then the organization, the people within the organization will gravitate to that, especially when they have been a part of understanding what the goal is and what the mission is, and everybody's working towards that. You know, Dr. King, during the Civil Rights Movement, had to really speak to the reality and the conditions that people were enduring, and that was his ability as a man who could articulate the pain and the injustice and say that everyone can be a part of making society better. And he welcomed people to be a part of that effort.
Another thing that Dr. King espoused was he felt that great leaders engaged the heart, you know, and a lot of what he did with the civil rights movement, it didn't come from a place of like insistence. He kind of pulled people into what he was trying to do. How can leaders do that today?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand Dr. King is to understand a core value that he had. And that core value was he valued every individual, no matter their station in life, no matter their occupation, no matter their income. He believed that humanity, the humanity of man, was to value every individual. And I think a successful corporate leader must understand he or she values everyone in the organization. So the person who is in the C-suite or the person who may be in maintenance all have value and all contribute to society. And I think that's what a strong leader recognizes, that everyone in the organization is valued and appreciated.
You know, Dr. Ward, those are great points you made. And also, to take it a little step further, you know, great leaders, when they're engaging the heart, it has to extend beyond, you know, the confines of, you know, the business.
Yes.
It can also extend into the community. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think a strong organization understands that corporate citizenship is key. And if you think about a corporation, they have two opportunities. The first is the human capital that that corporation has. So people in the organization can be enormous contributors and servant leaders in the community. They can give countless volunteer hours. And then also, business leaders can serve as that catalyst that brings people together. So you can bring people together in the community and look at critical issues that are facing the community, and that corporate leadership, that corporate citizen, can gather people together and say, what can we do working together? There are so many things that corporate leaders can do, and there are countless examples where corporate leaders have been in communities and their presence beyond just the confines of the business has transformed that community. And I think that is tremendously successful. I know Wynn Resort has a great reputation of that, and I commend you and commend the organization for the countless hours that your employees contribute to society, and how your administration is committed to corporate leadership in the community. That says a lot, but that builds on Dr. King's legacy, because if you remember, he made appeals to corporate leaders quite often that they could have a major impact in making society better for all people.
Another thing that Dr. King talked about as it relates to great leaders was, you know, great leaders refuse to accept the status quo.
Yes.
And we certainly know during the civil rights movement, he had to move past many barriers to keep the dream alive, and he wasn't complacent. So given that, how can leaders go about not accepting the status quo?
Well, if you think about it, I often remind people, when you look at Dr. King as well as Mrs. King's legacy, they made a conscious decision to return to the South because they knew that their purpose in life was to make life better. You know, at 26 years old, Dr. King had a PhD from Boston University. Mrs. King was a renowned musician, a renowned soprano voice. Dr. King had opportunities to be in higher education in the North. He had pastoral office in the North. But he and Mrs. King made the conscious decision that they would return to the South and deal with the injustice that was found there. Corporate leaders also, too, are often confronted with the choice that they have to make. And so they have made the choice, or they will make the choice, that I want to be a part of making life better for the community for which we serve. Now, I know, first of all, a businessman is always concerned about the bottom line, and he should be. But also, if he or she understands that that competitive edge can also be significantly enhanced by what they do in the community, that carries on the legacy of Dr. King. It's tough decisions that have to be made, but to get the results that you're looking for, it's okay to make tough decisions, because the end result is a better society, a better work environment, and a stronger organization.
Now, this next characteristic of a great leader that Dr. King spoke about was great leaders create a sense of urgency. And that's just not because a lot of things that I do, I do with a sense of urgency, but how can leaders today use this sense of urgency to move their initiatives forward?
Well, I think, clearly Dr. King recognized the urgency of fighting against injustice. That was the urgency that he was laser focused on. Corporate leaders now have a multitude of issues that they have to look at. It's not only the competitive edge and the profit margin, but also you think about the societal issues that they can give leadership to as well. So I think the urgency of corporate leaders saying we want to be a part of the solution. And if you really understand Dr. King's legacy, he was not only identifying what the challenges are or were, but he also was offering solutions on how can we working together as a totality of society to deal with the issues that we are confronted with. And I think that's where our corporate leaders can have a great influence. Their influence and their talents and skills, as well as the collective of their organization, saying that we want to be a part of the solution. And I think that's what Dr. King clearly represented, a leader who was focused on solutions. It's very easy to identify what the problems are, but the real question, the urgency is, if you remember the last part of that quote, he says, positive action. So it's not enough to talk about what the problem is, but what are we going to do to be a part of the solution? What action are we going to take?
Yeah, and that's a great distinction. And also, sometimes people, use the word urgent and fast synonymously.
Yes.
Like, what's the difference in creating a sense of urgency or moving or leading with a sense of urgency versus just going fast?
Well, urgency creates a state of emergency. That it is, all hands on deck, let's deal with it now. And because if we don't deal with the situation now, there are consequences in the future if we don't recognize that it's an urgent crisis. Then we are dealing with problems that we may not want to understand. Fast says, you can join me if you'd like, we're going to confront it. But urgency, he said the urgency of now. That means we got to act now. And I think corporate leaders have the ability to say, the situations require our immediate action. So we want to be immediately a part of the solutions that are impacting our communities in a negative way. Dr. King said it so often, everyone can be great because everyone can be a servant. And everyone can provide service. And so servant leadership, I think, is the hallmark of any corporation, that you can create servant leadership and reward servant leadership within the organization.
Very often, great leaders are called to act in accordance with their highest values. And Dr. King recognized that. So in giving that, how do you feel this ties into inclusive leadership?
Well, I think if you study Dr. King thoroughly and you think about the 1950s and the 1960s, he exemplified inclusive leadership, which was a major value that he had as a part of the civil rights movement. So if you really study the movement, you had people from all diverse backgrounds, which clearly spoke to inclusivity. You had women involved in the movement, you had whites, you had blacks, you had different religious denominations, you had young and old, you had people from all economic components of society, all feeling that they had a part in the movement. But that was because Dr. King created an environment that respected inclusion. So you could have a rabbi and a Catholic priest and a Protestant minister and a female from Massachusetts as a young white female coming into the South as a student, coming from college to work in the South, alongside a student that was a student at a historically black college. Or you could have someone who by day worked in someone's home as a domestic in the movement and being a part of next to someone who was a college professor. So Dr. King clearly represented, but one of the most critical ones to me was the young people that he had involved in the movement. So you had high school students participating in the movement. You had college students participating in the movement. And here is someone who created an inclusive environment that college students could be involved. So I think a strong leader now in corporate America has to understand the importance of inclusion and making sure that the organization, from the highest level to every level of the organization is very inclusive and represents society. That's a core value for any strong organization, that all are welcome and that all have a contributing component to the organization. And I would say that if you don't adopt that posture, that you are doing your organization a great disservice.
I totally agree. I think inclusivity in and of itself can be used as, a business, corporate advantage asset.
Yes, it's a
I
true
mean,
asset.
our people truly are an asset to the business. And when they feel included,
Yes.
They feel more empowered. They feel a part of the vision of the company. And I think that's something important, and that's something that Dr. King espoused throughout the civil rights movement.
And to be honest, Glenda, you can't celebrate Dr. King on January the 15th to celebrate his birthday, and then 364 days you don't practice that inclusive core value that he had. You've got to be inclusive of all people.
Another characteristic Dr. King described as it relates to great leaders is he felt that great leaders refused to settle. And that's certainly something we saw. Dr. King, during the civil rights movement, he compromised on maybe some smaller things with the civil rights movement, but he was relentless in his pursuit of the goal of the civil rights movement. Do you feel if leaders settle too much that they may lose sight of the goal?
Oh, I think so. I think, first of all, Dr. King was relentless in holding firm to the goal. And while every effective leader understands that in the art of negotiation, there's some give and take, but you can never lose sight on what your ultimate goal is. And his ultimate goal was that America must live up to its true meaning, that everyone would be treated equal, and that democracy was not reserved for any one segment of society, and that we must end segregation in the South. He was relentless, and his fortitude and dedication to those goals were unwavering. And I think a strong leader must understand and be committed to always, I know I've got to negotiate, but when it comes to the top priority, the ultimate goal, I am unwavering and I am uncompromising in that position.
And it makes sense. Because of him being relentless during that, he finally reached the goal. And so that's something that's very, very important.
And that's the Dr. King that we need to celebrate and honor. That a strong leader understands it's not about the person. It's about the movement, it's about the cause, it's about the goals and the objectives. So a corporate leader understands that he or she recognizes that it's about the whole. It's about the totality. It's about the collective vision and the collective strategic goals of the organization. I just happen to be the temporary steward to help guide it. But I'm guiding it because I've got the input and the ownership from everyone within the organization. That's what Dr. King truly represented in his lifetime.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into the next characteristic that he felt was important. Acknowledging, great leaders acknowledge the hard work of their teams.
Yes.
To your point, he understood that it was a collective effort.
That's
now,
right.
He may have been the conduit by which a lot of this got accomplished, but it was a collective team effort. In giving that, how can business leaders leverage the collective knowledge and support of their team towards a goal?
Well, I think you have to create the forum and the platform where everyone on the team can feel that they have ownership and input in the goals and the direction and the vision and the core values of the organization. So the leader must create that environment. Dr. King created that. When you study the movement, they would have sessions frequently on a daily basis. They would come together and strategize, listen to each other's viewpoints, and then by the end of that session, they would have a collective path forward that they all agreed on. And it was not a dictatorial kind of thing. You know, I'm Dr. King, so I said this is what we're going to do. No, they would assemble together and determine what's the course of action, what's the strategy we need to have. Now, of course, with any organization, there's always disagreements, which is healthy. Disagreement is healthy, but at the end of the day, when everyone can say, as a unit, as an organization, this is our path forward, and we're going to move onward and upward together. I think that's the environment that Dr. King created. And to really crystallize that, Glenda, was, I believe, when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. And even in his acceptance speech of the Nobel Peace Prize, with all of the world and international global recognition that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was receiving, when he accepted that Nobel Peace Prize, he said, I'm accepting it for the people of the civil rights movement. I'm accepting it for the countless faces that you don't know, the names that you don't know. That's evidence of a true leader, because he could have very easily said, I am Dr. King and I take this award for Dr. Martin Luther King. But he said, no, I accept it for the movement. Now, to me, that's evidence of a true leader and a true man that understands his servant leadership at the end of the day that helps you reach your goal.
And when leaders, business leaders, do that in their respective organizations, how do you feel that employees are receptive to that? I would think it would be motivating to them. How does that tie into overall employee engagement?
Well, I think all humans want to be valued. And so when employees feel that they are valued and appreciated, I have found they work harder when everyone understands what the goals and objectives are, and they believe their opinions are valued. It is so critical that the success of the organization is derived because everyone feels valued. You come to the organization and you feel my contribution is going to help us reach the bottom line goal of the organization. When you value employees, when you value, and I use the word colleagues a lot, because I don't believe in the hierarchy that, you know, it's a high level and a low level. I believe that we're all colleagues, and I think it's important for us to respect each other. First of all, acknowledge each other, and to say that everyone has a contributing component to the organization.
And finally, one thing that Dr. King felt was an important characteristic is that he felt that great leaders always paint a vivid picture of a better tomorrow. Yes. He was very forward thinking in his, not only his I Have a Dream speech, but just in his thoughts for what America could be. Yes. In giving that, how can, you know, visionary leaders get their employees to buy into the vision of an organization?
Well, I think as frequently as possible, corporate leaders have to articulate what that vision is. You can never do it too often. You have to be consistent in sharing what that vision is. And then after you share that vision, you got to live it out. You got to work towards whatever that vision is. If it's your vision to see your corporation be extremely successful, to be great community citizens, then your leadership style must give evidence to that. Dr. King articulated a vision, an ideal, beloved community, but he worked towards it every single day. So once you articulate that vision, you got to share it, and then ask others to join you in implementing that vision or striving towards that vision. And that's what Dr. King did. His eloquence and his scholarship in being able to articulate the vision for America, and then he asked people to join him in creating that environment. You know, in August at the Lincoln Memorial, he said he dreams of a nation. I have a dream that our children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Everyone, no matter your race, your gender, your age, you could really gravitate to that vision, that my child will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So a leader must be in a position to articulate the vision for the corporation. What type of corporation do we want to have? We want to have a corporation that's inclusive, where all employees are valued and appreciated. We want to be a corporation where in the community they can look to this organization and say they are strong citizens, they are strong corporate citizens in the community, where your employees are volunteering and giving countless volunteer hours, but you're appreciated for doing that. So I think that's how you articulate a vision and then have people feel a part of that vision.
Well, Dr. King he personified inclusive leadership in everything he espoused, everything he did, the people he managed to bring along with him. And so I just would be interested in your final thoughts on how business leaders can pick up this mantra of inclusive leadership and utilize it in their respective organizations.
Well, I think a strong leader must have that as a core value. You know, that was a part of who Dr. King was. And so you have to have a true commitment that I want my organization to be inclusive. And if you have that as your daily goal, then you will work every single day and you will encourage every component of the organization to do that. If I want my organization to be inclusive, then I'm going to say to my managers, I'm going to say to our frontline employees, I want this organization to be inclusive. I want it to have a reputation inside the organization and outside of the organization. You know, that's a company I'd like to be a part of because it is inclusive. And I can see myself as a part of that organization. So you want people to say, you know what, I'd like to be a part of the Wynn because it is an inclusive organization. I think that is what the goal of corporate, and you all are doing a great job of that. But I think if we could have more of our corporate leaders to adopt that philosophy of Dr. King, not just honor him with words, but honor him with deeds and actions. You know, be that positive action when he talked about that fierce urgency of now. And you have to be very intentional. You know, leadership is an intentional, you get up every single day and say, you know what, I want to make it better than I found it.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Ward, thank you so much for being a part of this program. We really, really appreciate it. And we definitely appreciate the insights that you've given us with regards to Dr. King's legacy of leadership.
Well, thank you, Glenda. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I want to commend Wynn and commend you and the leadership for celebrating Dr. King in such a way that you were looking at the true Dr. King and that living out his legacy is 365 days of the year. Congratulations and thank you for having me.